Yes, welcome to our first series, our first webinar for 2022. I'm Wendy Anderson. I look after the property and insurance for the church. My colleague Trudy Downes is our wellness, safety and risk advisor. I'm going to speak to you about tenancies for presbyters, and Trudy's going to talk about emergency drills. And hopefully I can control the screen. Bear with me. Whoops.
Hang on, I'll put it back again.
So I thought it was timely to talk about tenancies for presbyters, whether it's if you have a new presbyter who's just moved into a parsonage, or if you want to renew the tenancy agreement. I can do it. So there are a number of things to consider when buying or building a parsonage. One of the important things is the location in the neighbourhood, the proximity to the church, to schools for the presbyter's children, should they have any children, and the community. The other thing to consider too regarding the location is the remarketing of the parsonage. Should the presbyter buy their own home, or should they move to another stationing, and you wish to sell the parsonage and perhaps buy another parsonage because the new presbyter that's coming in may have different needs. The orientation of the building is important, with the sun, the view, and is there a view of the garden? Is there a view full stop? But sun is certainly something that was definitely worth considering, because that has a bearing on how warm the house is and heating. Is the street presentation, what is that like? The neighbourhood scene, does the house fit in with that neighbourhood scene? Public and private areas, is there a private area for the presbyter's family, and in particular when the presbyter perhaps is holding a meeting or meetings, and there's private areas for the family? Is the access good? Sometimes our presbyters have an elderly relative, or in fact they may have access requirements as well. The number of rooms, the interrelationship rooms, the size of the property, and also the adequacy for the size of the occupants. How many people are going to live in this property? The presbyter's office location is always something that MCPs will want to look at, and in particular, the access from the entry. So if the presbyter's office is by the front door, for instance, and if people access inside the property from the front door, then we'd probably also like to think that the presbyter's office is near that door, so they're not walking through the family area to get to the presbyter's office. And once again, the adequacy for disabled, what's the access like? And if not, what might be required? Nope, it's not going to go. The other thing to consider is the parsonage furnishings. The kitchen layout's a reasonable one, and to consider. So, is it going to work for this family? And also, is it away from the presbyter's office? Floor coverings, are they neutral? Are they in good order? When are they likely to be replaced? And I'm not just considering speaking about carpet here. I'm also want to include all the floor coverings such as tiles, lino, vinyl, etc., or timber flooring. Drapes and curtains are in good order. When are they going to need replacing? What's the maintenance of drapes and curtains? Because if it's if they require dry cleaning, the presbyter may need assistance with that. What sort of heating is there, and is the heating adequate, and is the heating within the requirements of the Tenancy Services Act? It needs to heat the living area and heat it well so that it's warm in the winter especially, and it's adequate for the needs of the family. What sort of lighting is there? Is there adequate lighting for the children to do their homework in their bedrooms? And I see I have a question from Alan Little, and I will be looking at uniting parishes soon in this presentation. So the lighting in the Presbyter's office is very important, because Presbyters spend more time in the office at home than they do at the parish. Well, not necessarily more time, but they do spend a reasonable amount of time in the family home, in their own office. And as a lot of parsonages these days are well away from the church, so for the Presbyter and their family, or the family's privacy. Is the house sanitary? The sanitation, do we have any water leaks, or do you have any water leaks? And that everything is ventilated correctly or adequately, and there isn't dampness, moisture, and that's well ventilated. Smoke alarms are another necessity. Smoke alarms need to be either hardwired in or have a long life battery. I have another question that has come up regarding a presbyter in his own home, and I will be covering that as well. Insulation is another requirement. The insulation has to be within the standards required by the tenancy services, and the best way to ensure that insulation is adequate, and that it's in all of the areas of the home where it's possible to have insulation, such as in the ceiling and underfloor, and where possible in the walls. But that's a practical. We'd like to look at that from a practical perspective. We require insulation, and we require under the healthy homes, but also it may not be practical to put insul fluff or insulation in the walls. Is the hot water supply efficient for the family's needs? Is the size of the hot water cylinder enough? And once again, the Presbyter's office. The next three slides I'm going to show you as I speak, hopefully. Regarding the rights and responsibilities of the Presbyter, the parish, and the Property Advisory Committee. So the Presbyter has a number of rights, and probably the main consideration is the privacy for the family. The fact that the Presbyter, Parish, and Synod Property Advisory Committees have rights and responsibilities highlights the relationship between those three groups, and the importance of respect for all of those groups is what we would expect. I'll see if I can move this on. It doesn't seem to be working very well for me. We can go one more, please, Trudy. So in general, date of occupancy for new ministers or for new ministry is 2nd of February. There is a reasonable amount of flexibility surrounding that, because sometimes work needs to be carried out at the parsonage before the new minister moves in, and that work may not be able to be carried out while there is a family in the property. The parish may not have the means to purchase a parsonage, but they may decide, and so they may decide to rent a property for the new minister, so that there is housing there for them when they move in. And also, of course, is the parish provided accommodation. Now, presbyters are able to live in their own home, and a lot of presbyters like to do that, but sometimes when they change stationing, that's not an option. if they have a property in another area of New Zealand and they haven't sold that property, or they don't want to, they may decide they want to retire back in that region. There's a number of reasons, but presbyters can live in their own home, and if they do, they would receive a housing allowance, and to compensate them for the fact that they still may have a mortgage, and also they're using their own home. So there are a number of tenancy agreements. Well, there's three tenancy agreements, four actually, if you were to go to the public rental arena. And the first of those tenancy agreements I would like to speak about is the service tenancy agreement. This is available on our website at www.methodist.org.nz under the heading of insurance and property. It's also a copy, the editable copy is available online, and it's also included in the bricks and mortar, section 18 of the bricks and mortar booklet. So service tenancy agreement is for all ministers living in a parsonage. The service tenancy agreement was drawn up by our lawyer. We went to our lawyer and asked, is it necessary for us to have a tenancy agreement for presbyters because they're not having to pay rent? And he said definitely, because that is for the protection of the parish and also the protection of the presbyter and their family. In general, this is for this is for parish provided accommodation, and where there's a tenancy, where the presbyter has their own home, this is not used for that. We have other documents that are for that are not quite as involved. This service tenancy agreement includes property inspections, the state of the property that's agreed between the parish and the presbyter when they commence the tenancy, and also covers, as I said, inspections. So you'll find this in section 18. It's also appendix 2 in the bricks and mortar property booklet. And this will include all the healthy homes requirements: insulation, ventilation, heating, moisture ingress and drainage, and the draft stopping. Smoke alarms, once again, out in the hallway, outside bedrooms. Do not put smoke alarms in the bedrooms, because sometimes if the door is closed, the smoke alarm may not work until the smoke is actually in the room, and it might be too late. And then insulation for thermal management, reducing heat transfer. It also has often has an acoustic benefit, and fire and impact insulation. And in the service tenancy agreement, that will also include a statement about the position of the insulation, ceiling, wall, or floors, where it is, the type of and condition of that insulation. Is it fiberglass, mineral wool, polythene, or perhaps polyurethane? The service tenancy agreement sets out that there's no rent and there's no bond, except on very rare occasions, and those rare occasions would be when there has been previous damage in a parsonage by the presbyter and or their family when they move in. So the parish may decide that they would like to ask for a bond, and that bond must be lodged for the tenancy services. Regular inspections are necessary, and not less than annually. So I've had that confirmed. It's once a year at the least. We would recommend that the Synod Property Advisory Committee, members of a member or two members, carries out that inspection, so that the parishioner who may be carrying out that inspection isn't put in a compromising position should there be some maintenance required because there's been damage caused by the family. The outgoings, electricity and gas, are the responsibility of the presbyter. And also water use over 1,000 litres a day will be charged back to the presbyter, but the parish will be expected to pay up to that 1,000 litres. The service tenancy agreement will include the number of persons residing in the property, and also it does cover the minister's privacy, and that any of the, if there is a dispute, that the parish, with perhaps the assistance of Synod Property Advisory Committee, or it may be connectional office staff may be required, such as myself and or maybe Tara, but most likely myself, and we would try and work that out before it was ever taken to the Tenancy Tribunal. So this service tenancy agreement is to be used for Methodist properties. At this stage, the other denominations were asked if they would like to use this agreement as well with their own letterhead or heading, and the two denominations of Presbyterian and Anglican declined. So David Bush tried extremely hard to get everybody on board for this, so that we were all reading from the same page and had the same conditions for presbyters housing. So with the uniting parishes, they will be using a normal tenancy agreement that's available online from Tenancy Services, or from Whitcalls, you would purchase that. We don't have any other control over the uniting parishes that where the parsonage is not a Methodist property, regardless of which denomination the presbyter is from. So where a presbyter is residing in their own home, there's a tenancy agreement. Now, I've just set out some of the information that is included in this 4-page tenancy agreement, and so the landlord, just to make it clear, is the presbyter or the joint family or family trust owners, because it may be owned by a family trust which the presbyter is part of, or their family is part of, and there's an agreement. So that's that is the landlord, and the tenant is the parish or the board that is renting that property back off the presbyter. All tenancy agreements to be in writing, and it's pretty much, well, a lot of it is exactly as it would be under the service tenancy agreement or the tenancy services residential property agreement. So the second page of this includes responsibilities yet again. What's the expectation? We wouldn't expect the parish to have to repair this property because it's the landlord's property, and they would be responsible for the maintenance of the premises and keeping them in a reasonable condition, bearing in mind that, it's an interesting question, bearing in mind that this is there will be meetings with parishioners and other people with the presbyter in their own home. So that there are responsibilities for the landlord as well, and once again, I can't stress enough privacy for the presbyter, especially when it's their own home. They're allowed to invite anyone they like to come into their property, just as you and I can. I guess that's within reason. And also that there is the next 2 pages are the actual agreement that needs to be completed and signed by the landlord, being the presbyter and the parish. Now, the sublease agreement is where the parish rent back the property to the presbyter. So that has to be dated. That, once again, I think it's 2, might be 3 pages. It's very similar to the service tenancy agreement, but of course there's a lot of those conditions don't apply. The lessee is the Board of Administration. which is actually the parish, and the lessor, sorry, the lessee is the minister, and the Methodist Church in New Zealand, the Board of Administration, is the lessor. So I see there are a number of questions. I'll just have a look at those. So someone just said, I thought we were talking about emergency drills and tenancies for presbyters, which is what I have just spoken about. Trudy will be speaking about emergency drills once I've finished. I'll look at those questions now, or would you prefer me to do that later, Trudy?
Well, there's, I'll start at the top if you like and read them to you. What if the manse is part of the joint venture? Are the standards the same?
I think I've answered that now. The service tenancy agreement covers everything that is in the residential tenancy services resident agreement that is signed by everyone, members of the public renting property from a landlord. So the other denominations declined to they declined to use the service tenancy agreement. So where we would not be involved where the manse, with the manse, and it's owned by the other denomination, that would be for the parish to produce the tenancy agreement, which I would imagine is the online tenancy.
So then it applies to the Methodist owned properties for the joint ventures.
That's right, because we want to protect that property for the parish.
So, and the next question is, when the presbyter is living in their own home, how many bedrooms of median market rate is a parish responsible to pay?
It's a very good question, because you might have a 10 bedroom home. The recommendation is that the property is a 4-bedroom home for families. There have been occasions where we've got a single person in the property. That's not necessarily someone that has purchased their own, that is living in their own home, but we wouldn't expect there to be 4 bedrooms for a single person living in a parsonage. And I guess it's up to the owner of the property, the presbyter, to decide what sort of property they wish to buy. But I think that 4 bedrooms, market value for 4 bedrooms in that location, is fair and reasonable.
Another question come through. If the tenancy agreement is renewed yearly and the parish refuses to adjust the allowance to accommodate market increase, what should happen?
I think that the parish has an obligation to be able to pay market rent to the presbyter for the property. I would say that would definitely be something that might have to go to synod, or would go to synod, I should say, so that a fair and reasonable rent is negotiated. And MCPC may also decide that they want to step in as well to make it fair and reasonable for both parties.
So if there's any areas of dispute, then the chain of queries can go through to synod as the first point of call, and then possibly up to the Methodist Connectional Property Committee. Yes,
That's correct.
If anyone else has any questions and they haven't discovered the chat function or the Q&A function, down the bottom of your screen, there's some windows that you can open up there and just type your questions in, and we'll answer them as we go along.
There was one other thing that I saw that you wrote, you said to chat, Trudy, to say this presentation will be recorded and it'll be available after tomorrow. Yeah, I just want to reiterate that this will be available.
Okay. Another question has just come in, Wendy. Is there any difference to the process or requirements if the presbyter is a supply minister rather than stationed to the parish?
No, because the supply minister still requires accommodation, and they would still, the parish would not, if they agree to have the supply minister, they still have to provide accommodation for the minister, whether it's a a sublease agreement back to the minister in their own home with a lease agreement from the minister, or if it's a parsonage.
Excellent.
So that's all the questions. As I said, I saw a question pop up before when I was speaking, and that was that the person thought that Trudy was going to talk about emergency drills and I was going to talk about tenancies for presbyters. Well, tenancy, I have spoken about tenancy for presbyters. You may have come in late, perhaps, I don't know. But Trudy's going to speak now about emergency drills. So I'll hand you over to Trudy. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Yeah, so sorry, we changed the order of process just to see if everybody was awake and watching. So thank you for your attention. Outstanding. So today, obviously, I'll be talking about emergency drills. This is step 3 of our emergency response plan process that we have on our website. So last year in September, we spoke about step 1, which is creating your emergency response plan. In October, we spoke about step 2, about getting your Fire and Emergency New Zealand approved stamp put on your evacuation plan. So step 3 is about actually doing emergency drills. And again, all of this information is on the website, and I'm available at any time if you have any questions about it. So the basis for our actions, excuse me, is if we plan for it, we should practice it. So in our emergency response plan, we've got a number of scenarios. I'm not saying that we need to practice for all of those scenarios, but we need to be aware. The key people need to be aware of what to do. In addition to the scenarios in our emergency response plan, we also have a shelter in place plan that's available on our website. That's for situations, maybe the weather's really bad, there's a flood outside, don't bother going outside, shelter in place. But sheltering in place is also, unfortunately, after the Christchurch mosque shootings is when this plan was developed. We need to be aware that shootings happen in New Zealand now. So there's a plan there and you can practice what to do. And recently, very recently, the last week, a COVID-19 exposure plan was put up on the website. And again, I'd recommend that that's one of the ones that you practice probably as soon as possible. Some of the drills are a legal requirement. Evacuation drills, if you have a building under the approved evacuation scheme, you must have a drill or a training process in place every 6 months. And with regards to other drills that you might undertake, it's because stuff happens and we should be prepared for it. Because it doesn't matter how old we are, we need to learn and be reminded of what to do in an emergency situation. Because this is about giving people the set of procedures to help them overcome that initial dump of adrenaline that happens when you hear the fire alarm go, or when you see that somebody's cut their finger and there's blood everywhere. You have that initial dump of adrenaline in your system, but if you've got a go-to process that you're familiar with, it will help you just get over that hump a little bit quicker and get you operating and doing things that need to be done. So on the website under step 3, we have a full list of documents available. The evacuation drill guidelines is probably the first one to look at. Who do you tell that you're actually going to hold a drill? Well, if you've got a monitored alarm at your building, you need to tell the people monitoring the alarm you're about to turn the alarm on and have a drill. You can phone your local fire station to say, hey, we're going to have a drill. You want to pop around and see how good we do. There's a full checklist available on the website as well, along with templates so that you can cut out a tag for your doors, so that as you go into each room to check that it's clear, you can just put a tag on the door to go, I've been in here, I'm moving on. When you've completed your drill, you need to write an evacuation report. You can either do this manually on a form or email it through, or Fire and Emergency have an online report that you can fill in. So you've got options available to you there. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the emergency drill scenarios. It was created last year to provide some thinking on how to undertake drills. If you've all been to school in New Zealand, then you remember the ones at school. The bell goes, you go stand outside, you hang around for 10, 15 minutes while the teachers do whatever teachers do. In the minds of kids, this is how I remember the drills. And then you wander back to classroom and it's all a bit dull and boring. We can do better than that. We've got more flexibility on how we undertake it. So the drill scenario document that was created and put up on the website last year goes into a little bit more detail of how to zhuzh it all up a bit, make it a bit more interesting. Because one of the key things that we need to think about is the interactions that occur when you have an emergency. So here's a really little example. We had a young female building warden, and part of her area that she was to make sure was clear was the men's toilet and shower room. So one particular drill, I sent one of the gentlemen in the office up into the shower room and I said, go hide there and don't come out unless you hear a banging on the shower room door or you see somebody's face that says, hey, there's a fire evacuation, come out. So the toilet door was gently knocked on and therefore he didn't come out because she didn't want to enter the rooms. So after the evacuation drill, and we said, well, I'm sorry, but Bruce has been burnt because our fire warden didn't go into the room. That particular fire warden is never going to have that same problem ever again. She's always going to go into the room because that's where the people are. So you can do lots of little things to make it interesting and to see if everybody's on their toes, because when you assemble outside and you count the noses, we should have been one nose short because he was still up in the shower room being burnt with our imaginary fire. The other thing too is to understand people have good intentions, but if they're not part of the core first responders that you have in your building, then they can actually get in the way and they can hinder good outcomes. A scenario that was given to me was some good bystanders noticed that somebody was having some difficulty, took the person to the toilet, but they then blocked the first aiders from coming in because the Good Samaritans thought that they had it under control. Because of the delay that they put into having the person attended to, by the time the ambulance was called, everybody was leaving the church. So all the cars were blocking up the driveway and the ambulance couldn't get in. So you can imagine it just increased the amount of anxiety that was being felt by the first attenders, the first aid response team that were being blocked from helping the person, and then the person themselves when the ambulance was delayed even getting into the building. So good intentions can create barriers to good outcomes. And therefore we need to understand that interactions between all the people that are involved in the process, your wardens, your building occupants, your rubberneckers, and the official emergency responders and our first aiders. So a lot of it goes into the planning process for creating a drill. That's why we created the checklist. Have you thought of everything just for a fire evacuation drill? The document with the different drill scenarios that you can think about. How will we do our evacuation drill or our whichever drill that we're going to do this week? Who has the largest need to know what to do in any given scenario? Who needs training in what area? So if you were going to do a full fire evacuation drill and pretend that somebody had an injury, do your wardens know what to do? Are your first aiders current with their first aid certificates? What aspect of the plan needs changing? If you think about a COVID-19 exposure plan, the first thing you need to do is communicate with all of your people that there's been a potential exposure event occurring in our buildings. So are you going to text everybody? Are you going to phone everybody? Have you got a phone tree set up? Does the phone tree work? If it's a fire evacuation, how are we going to ensure that the right information gets to the fire truck? if it's a medical situation, how do we make sure the right information gets to the paramedics when they turn up? So what we need to do is train on every aspect of the plan to make sure it works. We're looking for a form of continuous improvement, so the lessons we learn get plugged back into our plan so that next time we have our drill, we can pay attention to those areas and make sure that they work the next time. So I have subjected the connectional office, and they're such a wonderful bunch of guinea pigs, to a number of drills over the years. I will be sharing with you a lockdown drill video that we took, and then I'll talk to you about the planning that went on before we had the drill. The COVID-19 outbreak, we had that drill not that long ago, maybe 2 weeks, just to say, one of the staff members in the office has caught COVID, what are you going to do? So we had a plan in place, and the plan worked pretty well. But it did make a lot of people think, gosh, what will happen when we actually have a case in the office? So the idea of the drills, again, is to get everybody thinking, what if it actually happened? What would I do? And then you practice it to make sure that you minimize the disruption from the events. So we could have the most thorough, comprehensive safety plan on file. Right? I could give you the best paperwork in the world, but without the regular practice, it will be ineffective when it matters most. So when safety drills are held, they should be done with meaningful purpose. This video I'm about to show you was a lockdown drill that we had at the connectional office. Turn your volume up too.
This is a lockdown drill. In a lockdown drill, you will escape from me, you will hide from me, and you will tell your mates. During a lockdown drill, you should be quiet, your phone will be quiet, and I'm going to walk through the office shortly, and I expect to see people hiding. If you are not hiding, I will yell at you. There will be prizes for best effort, and you will not be making an effort. I will yell at you. So escape, hide, tell, because here I come, ready or not. Lockdown drill over.
So it was a very short drill. It took as long as that video took to play, but there was a lot of planning that went on in the background behind that. Some of the key things was I had to make sure that I didn't scare people. It was my brother, the perpetrator was my brother officer. I saw him, he did it. He's very loud, very big, very loud. So when he came in, I needed him to declare what he was doing, because otherwise I would have had people scared, potentially crying and doing other things that they didn't need to do. I prepared people by stealth. In the previous weeks, I made sure that it was dropped into conversations in the staff room about lockdown drills and what do you think about this and what do you think about that, to get people thinking about what should they be doing in an event where you've got an intruder in the building. I considered who needed to be involved. I was going to not tell anybody in the office because the whole office needed to get on board with this. I did end up telling a few people that weren't there. One, just to get the sign off from Wendy, who's my manager. She wasn't going to be there on the day, so that was fine. And the other one was we had a visitor in the office at the time. So just had a quiet word. They had their son with them. We were about to have a lockdown drill. You may wish to take your son into the staff room and away from the excitement, because it's not real, but potentially my brother looks like one scary dude. So you'll also notice there was a policeman available, and he was our independent observer. He was there to give us formal feedback on how well we did and whether the actions that we took were appropriate. Now, one of the things that we did was after our drills, we always come back together and we discuss what worked well and what didn't work well. So the discussions are really good. Everybody gets into it, which is always a pleasure to see. One of the things I asked them though was describe the perpetrator for me. So my brother went through, you can see him on the left-hand side of the screen, that's what he looked like. When he finished, I told him to change his clothes before he came back in. So obviously people had been hiding under their desks, and they said, he's wearing sneakers. Great, yep, he's wearing sneakers. They didn't see much of him, so that's all they saw. Somebody else said, I think he was in white. And we had a third person who actually described what he was wearing quite well. He had a tall hat. I'm not quite sure what was wrong with the hat. He was dressed in white, definitely had sneakers on. So they're all discussing this. And in the meantime, my brother's sitting at the table having a cup of tea with us. They couldn't describe his height because the hat helped disguise that, and they were all in a bit of a rush. And I said, what about the fact that he's got a beard? So everybody had been sitting there with him in the room, and they didn't even say he's got a beard. So we need to realize that after the event, and this is where I was talking about that initial adrenaline dump that our bodies go through, you don't think how you might normally think. If we had had an intruder, the staff needed to be able to tell the police, what did he look like? Who should they be looking for? The fact that he had sneakers on and a white costume and a funny hat doesn't mean a lot, because he could have dumped those the minute he scarpered out the back door, which is what my brother did. So it was a very interesting drill. Took a lot of planning to think up. And the reason I did it is we had a previous drill. You saw the extent of this one. My brother read out a script. It was about 30 seconds long. That's how long everybody had to respond to the intrusion. In that time, everybody either hid or fled the building, which is what they were supposed to do. In the first drill that we had, I stopped the clock at 4.5 minutes just out of pity, because nobody knew what to do. Some of them hadn't even told somebody down the end of the building that there was an intruder and we need to take action. It was really pitiful, but it was brilliant, because that left us a huge scope to improve. We could only improve, we couldn't get worse. And that's part of the reason why we had the drill. It created a lot more calm for people in the office, that they knew what to do in the circumstances that we get put in. You may or may not be aware that we have a building behind us, Ministry of Social Development. They have a security guard on their building permanently, so nobody can go out without going past the security guard first. I told them we were having the drill. I didn't want my brother to have the police phoned up if somebody saw this suspicious character wandering around in a karate gi and a funny hat. I told the childcare centre next door as well, because they've got parents who would naturally be concerned about their children. And sorry, momentary loss of thought. And I did think in advance that the one thing I really wanted out of this was a photo of my brother in handcuffs so I could send it to my parents. I got it. It was awesome. It was a great learning tool for the entire office. Now, I'll just, before I show you the next video, I'll show you the end result. This was an evacuation drill that the Christchurch South Tongan Methodist Parish held. They put a lot of planning into this. Their particular building between the church and the hall, which are all connected, can hold hundreds of people. So the first thing that they did was they phoned me up and said, in 2 weeks' time, we want to have an evacuation drill, but we don't have an emergency response plan. So the very first thing we did was I helped them put together the emergency response plan from the templates that are available on the website. They selected the team, and then we had a walkthrough of the process for every single warden. So all the wardens walked all of the different areas to see what was involved with a fire evacuation. With the walkthrough process, what was identified was different pinch points or trouble points that needed to be addressed. So if you look at the photo of Reverend Moy shaking the policeman's hand, his name is Buzz, the fireman Buzz. On the right-hand side of that picture, you'll see somebody pushing a wheelchair over a ramp. So one of the access points that they noticed was they've got people that use wheelchairs and sticks to help them with their mobility, and getting over that gutter would have been a problem. So part of the evacuation plan includes getting people over the gutter. Also, you'll notice that they're standing in a park across the street from the church. This is because the number of people that can fit in the church will not fit in any other assembly point around the buildings. Therefore, they need to cross the road and assemble in the park. They organised for the independent observers, phoned up the local fire station, which also meant that they learnt where the local fire station was, and it was only around the block, so that was good. And so the wardens were educated through the walkthrough and through the process of putting together the emergency plan, and they wanted to educate the congregation as to what to do as well. Now, this is not a stealth exercise. We want people to succeed when you do evacuations. You don't want people to stand around going, what do we do? What do we do? You need to be specific, and you're allowed to tell them the answer. This is not a pop quiz. So they also put together an instructional video, which they played just before we had the evacuation. So there was no excuses. And they're still using a version of this now. I think it's in Tongan. I'm going to play it for you. I don't speak Tongan either, but it's completely understandable. Even if you're a visitor to the parish, you'd be able to follow what it says.
Malore lei kainga, koe ni a whakatokanga, ki hao mea e whai o ka hoko mai ha whakatu tāmaki, pe ha whakatamaki whakai na tūra, hange koe vera e whare, pe koha mofuike, pe koe ni a mea te ke whai. Whakatokanga I ange, e lea mai a e fire alarm, pe koe mea whakangorea whakaleo lahi, o leo lahi au pito, ke whakatokanga atu o iai e whaingata, pe koe vela o hoko ki whare, malo. Ko os iai ai kau tangata, ko whiri pe a teupi, ko kau uo teni, pe a kukore atu ke mo talango fua, pe mo whakaongo ke te nau tolu, ai mea e taratu ke te mo tolu ke mo whai rotonga, mo tau whenga ke tau huu kotoa ki tupa me he whare, malo. E whahinahino atu ke kau uo teni, ai matapa ofi taha, pe koe huu anga, ke huu ai ki tua I he wawe taha, ke mo malu taha, malo. Ka taki o whakatokanga I ange. Koe maongo matapa huu ki tua me he whare rotu, mo e horo,
I tawhaaki i Somerset Street, o ku alu o ku hifo i stepu ki lao, ki kele kele, malo. Whatonga i angi, ko huanga ki wheelchairs, te koe aluanga sariote, ki tua me whare o tu, o hui he tawhaaki ki he driveway, malo. O kutoe i ai foki, ai aluanga sariote wheelchair e taha, i mua i he foia ki he hala Somerset Press, malo. Kātaki o whakapau i angi, e ko whia ai huanga o whi taha, mo le rei taha, kia te koe, ke te hua i ki tupa, me i whare no tu mo he holo, malo. Kātaki o whakatonga i angi, o mahu inga o pita te mo mātu aki whanongo, mo tala mafua ki ka wote ni, ai whahino hino, te nau talatu ke te ki mo tolu, ai mea ke whai, malo. Mo kātaki, rotonga o tau whenga ke tau hukitu o me he whare no tu mo holo, o ki kai ke whie mau, ke whai halele, ke whakawawau ke tau whihia ki tupa. Ua, o ki kai ke te whie mau, ke whai tā, ke wha selfie, i o telefoni, ka tau whenga māmaria ke tau hukitua, te ria, na hoko whatu tāmaki, malo. O ku mātua ki mahu inga au pito, ke whakawhainga maria i hongo ni mā ke tokoni. Ko ia i kore atu, oua nā ke toi toko hamea i hongo ni mā, kai ata nā whie mau, hao tokoni aki honi mā, malo. Ka pau o i ai hao telefoni, hao ki hoka, whao ia he kata ho sote, pe koho tupelu, malo. Ka pau i ai hao kata to'o, handbag, ka taki o to'o aki ia ho uma, kai ata ho ni ma, ki ho whronga ki tua, mo e tokoni ki e kakai ke, malo. Mo ka taki, i ho mohu ki tua, me he horo mo e whare no tu, e iai ai kau tangata, te nau pure i ai hala pure anga. E ko traffic controller. Mo kātaki o tanga o fua ke te nau tolu, ai tu uni, mo whakangongo ke te nau tolu, ai mea te nau tala atu. Ki cross i he hala, malo. E tala atu, e kau traffic controller, ai wheitu ke mo wō, e ko mo cross i he hala ki ai, o taritari ai. Te tau whakataha kotoa i he wheitu ko ia, malo. O kātaki, o taritari he wheitu o whaikai whakataha, te anofo maua i kai o wareva, ke whangofua atu, te whaikakau, e moi, ke mo whoki mai ki whaleroti, pe kohoro, malo. Kātaki ko lawa whatongia, te tau whoki mai lewa ki horo, o mao hai puti, te tau maroro mai ki ai mo pōtara no. Maro o pito ho mo tarangofua, o mo tariangi, te tau whoki lewa ki horo, te tau pōtara no ai, i ngau e nā tau whakahoko, mo ha mea ke whakalelei aki, a ngau e ni ki he kahau, o tau te whito, o ka hoko mooni mai, hawera, te koha moku ike, maro o pito, tua o pai.
So you'll notice part of the instructions and that instruction set was to come back into the building for a cup of tea and a chat. That's so that as a group you can review how it went. If you think about it, you've come to the end of the Sunday service, you hold your evacuation drill, everybody's outside and they're going, woohoo, I'm jumping in my car and going home. So you need to get them back inside so you can discuss how well the drill went. The easiest way to do that is to offer a bit of food. And I realise in COVID times now that it might require a little bit of different thinking. If you pre-wrapped the biscuits or the cake when you offered it, perhaps then you still might be able to capture your audience again to have that conversation about how well it went. Oh, sorry. And that's the end of the talk on emergency drills. So that all the information will be shared along with the recording of this webinar after the event. And of course, you can always approach me, email, phone, for any questions that you may have. Thank you. Now, Wendy, we've got some more questions that came through. I think they're definitely for you, they're not my questions. If the parish has a 4-bedroom house that has passed the Synod Property Committee and all the health standards, but the presbyter does not want to live in it and has chosen to purchase their own home, what should happen? You're mute.
The parish has 2 options. They can rent that property out and use the rent to pay for the renting back the presbyter's own home, or they can sell that property. It's not something we always recommend because you should buy and sell in the same market. And if you were to sell the property and it was a number of years later before you had to purchase another one, you may be out of the property market, then you may not have enough money. So 2 options available there.
And how does a parish cope if the presbyter's home is within reasonable distance but is in a different median rental area with the parish? Because the parish will then be disadvantaged if the current parsonage rental is lower than the presbyter's, and they will also need to cover the cost of maintenance on the buildings.
Well, not the presbyter's own home. They won't have to pay for the maintenance of that property. If it's in a more expensive area, then I would recommend that there's a negotiation. The eyebrows are going. There's a negotiation regarding what's a fair and reasonable rent, and that once again we would ask that we would expect or hope that the synod will be involved. That would be my first port of call if I was on the property committee for the parish, and if that fails, then MCPC. And then and they may determine a fair and reasonable rent, or and if that fails, it may be that the connectional staff, such as myself, would be involved.
Right, we've got one last question. Rick, you may like to clarify this one. Who do we report to? I'm not sure who you're talking about with regards to reporting. If it's about your evacuation report, that goes through to Fire and Emergency New Zealand. Wendy, is there any reporting regarding property that we need to be aware of?
No, but we would expect the synod to be involved in inspections, especially after, say, 3 years, to ensure that that property is up to spec. It is a fair and reasonable property. It suits the needs of the family. I often say to parishes, would you live in here? Would you live in here? And also, we've had a number of changes under the Tenancy Services Act for the requirements for landlords with properties. So I think that's all I want to say about that.
That's great. Then thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time and attention. This, as we've said, this recording will be made available with all relevant information that we've spoken about tonight on the website, and we'll let you know when that's gone up on the website. Our next webinar will be on the Tuesday, 8th of March at 6 p.m. We'll be talking about compliance issues as they relate to buildings. So that'll be any health and safety compliance issues, as well as Building Act requirement issues and so forth. So thank you very much for your time and attention. Ka kite.
Good evening.